Welcome to our webinar today. Thanks so much to reiterate again for your time. My name is Julie Cheetham. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Travalyst, and I'm also responsible for our product development along with our coalition partners. I'm very excited to be speaking to you today about our data hub and the first minimum viable product that we're going to be building for that data hub, which will be accommodation focused. We'll give you a general overview and introduction to Travalyst too, for those of you who don't know us well yet. Our agenda for today will kick off with a bit of information about Travalyst and our work in the sustainable travel space. And then we'll head into some detail about who is our coalition and how do our solutions work, how decisions are made, and more about the work that we're currently doing. After that, we'll look at how some of our implementation of solutions has worked to date, particularly in the aviation space. You may be well versed with some of our work already, with major global travel brands that have picked up these programs and the reach that that is getting. And then our main topic for today, I'll hand over to my colleague, Jess Steenkamp, who I'm really privileged to have on the call with me today. Jess is our Senior Product Owner for Accommodation at Travalyst, and she'll be talking you through what we're doing in the accommodation sustainability data space with our data hub. So, Travalyst is changing the way we travel for good. I'd like to introduce you to how we came about and why we're involved in this work. Travalyst is a global, independent, not-for-profit organization. We were founded in 2019 by Prince Harry, the Duke of Sussex. Through our work, we aim to bring sustainability information to the mainstream in order to help travelers make more sustainable choices. We do this by means of convening a pre-competitive coalition of some of the biggest names in travel and technology globally. Our partners represent a combined market value of $3 trillion. And this multi-stakeholder collaboration is key to our work. We create a safe, pre-competitive space where our partners are able to share resources and work together to allow the work to scale far beyond what any of them may have been able to achieve on their own. We also work with an independent advisory group of world-leading academics and sustainability experts, many of whom are known to you. Thank you, Asha. Our travel system needs to change for good, and we know that travel contributes 10% to the world's GDP, approximately 10% of global jobs, many in marginalized communities. And we're also responsible for a large amount of emissions. So we need to be able to preserve those positive impacts whilst minimizing and mitigating the negative impacts. We are driven by our passionate founder, and over the past 2 decades, he has had the privilege of working in conservation alongside the indigenous communities that serve as the true guardians of some of the world's most vulnerable and breathtaking places. The Duke has seen what tourism done well can facilitate, and when it's done poorly, the damage that can occur. And that's what inspired him to create Travalyst in the first place. Getting all of these key travel partners globally together to make an incredible difference if we work together in that catalytic manner. Thank you, Asha. The next slide. So a little bit about how we work. We're an independent not-for-profit, as I mentioned, and this work is really important because every travel business and every part of the travel value chain has impacts, both positive and negative, on communities, biodiversity, social equity, and more. As tourism continues to grow, surpassing pre-pandemic levels, we see that we have a planet that needs urgent action. And travelers need more sustainable travel choices that are easy to understand, and an industry needs greater alignment so that we're not overwhelming and confusing our travelers. So the question is, how do we maximize the good that can come from our beloved sector whilst we work to reduce those negative impacts? At Travalyst, we believe that one way we can have an impact is through harmonized, consistent data and sharing that in a broad scale in ways that people can easily and freely access and understand. And this will arm both leisure and corporate travelers with the information they need to make informed choices. Our theory of change at Travalyst really hinges on getting credible, consistent, and compliant data into the hands of decision makers to accelerate impact-led systems change for our sector. In mind, our vision is to make travel a force for good. And our shared vision is one where all of you and all of us, travelers, businesses, policymakers, and communities can make more informed decisions that lead to a more equitable, nature positive, and net zero future for all. As I mentioned, we work through multi-stakeholder collaboration. We're completely agnostic and independent, and we mobilize the industry to provide trusted information at scale to lead to better decision-making and change. We firmly believe that we can't change what we can't measure. And those of you who know me from my Weaver days and before, this is something that I've been passionate about for almost 15 years now, that data is the base of our work, because unless we understand how we're doing, we can't improve it. But we're very aware that the data is not the be-all and end-all, and our work doesn't stop with the data. It's about changing the whole system together to drive what we're wanting to see. And we do that by ensuring that we can scale trusted information and then use that information to gather insights and use those insights to catalyze industry change. We want to be able to help the travel industry to measure their impacts accurately and then to target the right interventions on the supply side and the demand side to ultimately drive systems change. Travalyst is not only doing this currently for aviation, but also for accommodation, and we aim to expand that even further into other key verticals like rail. And we'll share a little bit more about those this morning. So what have we been doing since we started? Briefly, Travalyst was launched in 2019 with our first 5 founding partners. A year later, our first independent advisory group was appointed. These are world-renowned experts, keeping us on the straight and narrow, academics, professors, and those with much experience. The first version of our accommodation framework was launched in 2021, and those were the attributes that Travalyst published, and that resulted in millions and millions of data points being collected by our partners and getting those data points into the hands of travelers globally. The travel impact model, which aligned the whole industry around how we calculate flight emissions, or estimate flight emissions rather, was launched in 2022. And most of our partners and many non-partners are now using the TIM to great reach to put information about flight emissions in front of travelers. 2023 saw us launching our policy unit, which is to work to understand regulatory and compliance policies and what that means for the industry and how we apply them. And then over the course of last year and leading into this year, we've continued to expand that work, and we've announced our plans, which include forward-looking to other verticals, such as more work on accommodation, more work on certifications, and more work on rail. There's a quick snapshot of our partners. For those of you who don't know who we work with, we're really privileged to work with many of the amazing technology companies in this space. So what's next for Travalyst? And this comes to the crux of what we're talking about today. We would like to mobilize a critical mass of the industry behind the collection and distribution of consistent sustainability travel information that we can display at scale, and we can guarantee display because it is consistent across the whole ecosystem. And so we do this through convening our coalition to develop solutions that we can all get behind. In line with global targets, we seek to take action across the climate space and thereafter the community and biodiversity space. So why does the industry need Travalyst? One of our reasons for doing this is knowing that ultimately people won't be able, or they want to be able to make better choices. And we see this over and over again in survey gaps, but there's this intention action gap that we see. And we know that travelers across both the leisure and the corporate sectors are citing access to data and information or inconsistent information as a barrier to being able to do this. As you can see here, most travelers want to be able to travel more sustainably, but they're overwhelmed and struggle to figure out how to do so. In aviation, our first step to address this was to scale flight emission estimates through our coalition and beyond, so that travelers can see which flights on their chosen route have lower emissions. And while we recognize that scaling information alone will not drive the change we want to see, it's a critical first step to raising awareness and enabling better action from both travelers and suppliers across the industry. So to reiterate our approach, we try to drive alignment across the industry and then use those aligned models to scale trusted information across the globe in order to catalyze impact-led change. So if you see that wheelhouse, that is where Travalyst is playing and where our products are being developed. This is working for us so far. And last year in September, on our 5th birthday, we announced that the flight emissions estimates have appeared in more than 65 billion searches worldwide. And that is the scale that we want to see. We're wanting to have billions of searches for accommodation, having better information, billions of rail journey searches, being able to share what are the advantages of rail. And there are various, not just carbon related, for example. It's an enormous achievement and a very exciting milestone that showcases the scale we're able to achieve at Travalyst by aligning and working together as an industry. We've never seen sustainability data reach this scale before in the travel industry, but this is only the beginning. We will continue to work with all of you to get this information in front of travelers and to help to drive further decarbonization of the industry. On the next 2 slides, I wanted to show you a couple of great examples of how our partners have picked up the flight emissions model. So you'll see here trip.com and booking.com popping flight emissions information, those estimates in front of travelers at that point of decision. Travelers are informed which flights have emissions that are lower than a typical flight on their chosen route. And I think on the next page, we have the Skyscanner example. So this is really great, and we are so grateful to our coalition of partners, and this has been picked up way beyond our partners now to reach the impact of the data even further. Next, I wanted to show you that with our first accommodation framework, those V1 attributes, we worked with our partners to collect millions of data points around accommodation attributes. And this is the largest accommodation data set that's been collected to date. Now, we know that that's not good enough. We need to get to calculation level. You know, what are footprints? We need that kind of compliant information. That's what we're wanting to work on next with key industry players and stakeholders for the accommodation sector. And then the last thing I wanted to share with you on the next slide is our certifications initiative, which was born to make it easier and consistent and clear for our Travalyst partners to know which certifications could be displayed through their distribution channels. And so I think there are more than 60 now certifications that are listed as meeting these criteria, including all, from our partners at the GSTC as well, and other great organizations. So we're very excited to see this work taking off to make it easier for travelers and suppliers to understand, what are the compliant and credible certifications to move forward with. So This is what I'm going to hand over to Jess very soon to talk to you about in the accommodation space. This is how we work. We scale consistent, credible, and compliant sustainability information. Our current live work streams are to continue to work on our flight emissions through new and ever more accurate versions of the TIM calculations. And we're working on rail solutions. And then in accommodation, we continue to work on the certifications initiative to bring even more and more certifications onto that list, and then to help them to make sure that they are compliant as new and emerging legislation emerges. And on our data hub to make sure that we can get the relevant sustainability related accommodation data from suppliers out to consumers at scale. It's widely agreed that there is no central compliant accommodation sustainability database that is available open source, accessible to display consistent sustainability information at scale. And we aim to address this through this Data Hub project. So the Data Hub is an ambitious initiative. On the next slide, please, Asha, that we are wanting to create a single source of truth for sustainability data across key aspects of travel and tourism. In this discovery phase, we have an initial MVP that we're working on, purely around accommodation data. But the ultimate goal is to pull accommodation data, flight data, rail data from all verticals into a space where we can harmonize that data. There's no central place that I mentioned, as I mentioned before, that exists currently. And this is prohibiting progress, in a harmonized manner. Why Travalyst? Why are we committed to doing this? We've proven our ability to convene competitors and align them behind approaches, and to ensure that this information gets into the hands of corporate and leisure travelers globally. And so we're well positioned to be the trusted and neutral governor of this information at large. I'd love to introduce you to my colleague Jess Steenkamp now to talk you through the Data Hub and also how we're working with other key industry partners on this journey and on this solution to make sure that we have a harmonized approach. Jess, over to you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Jules. Really appreciate the intro and obviously all the context that you painted for leading up to this discussion, which I am so privileged to be able to facilitate. And let's get straight into it. So I just wanted to state up front that due to the sheer volume of attendance, which we absolutely love, we unfortunately can't open this forum for open floor Q&A questions, but I'm hoping that what I present answers a lot of your key questions and uncertainties. But if you do, throughout the session, have any questions, we would love to hear from you. I can see some of you already submitting some questions in our Q&A. So just if you have a look underneath the screen where I'm presenting, you'll see there's a Q&A button, and we would love to have you submit your questions so that we can make sure that we can address any of those critical concerns or thoughts that you may have, and then follow up with additional communications and address them, obviously, in our upcoming webinars moving forward. So just wanted to start up front with that as I progress into some of the detail around our project. So anyone who knows products know you need to start with why. And Jules has done a really great job of painting the why. I think we know they have a lot of problems and challenges without having the single source of truth. Therefore, we want to consolidate accommodation sustainability data, aligning that sector around the consistent metrics that can be collected, centralized, and distributed at scale. We want to make that data openly accessible to all so that stakeholders in the industry can utilize that consistent data and integrate it to their channels. We want to ensure compliance and credibility of that data and ensure that it aligns with those global regulations that are ever evolving for those policymakers and consumers' needs. And ultimately, in the future, as Jules mentioned, we want to expand to other verticals in the tourism and travel industry to create a holistic framework for measuring and reporting on progress and impact within our sector. Normally with a golden circle approach, I would be going into the hows, but I think it's so important to start with what on earth is this data hub concept? What are the functional blocks? What are we talking about here? So I wanted to start with this visual here, which really is what the data hub is at its core. It's about facilitating an end-to-end data journey that speaks to our core principles at Travalyst. So consistent, compliant, and credible data. And this includes the data in or the data ingestion and simplifying that process from multiple sources, processing that data, meaning logic, cleansing, verification, all those processes, and then distributing that data at scale. So making sure it's packaged and shipped in a way that is effective and efficient. But ultimately, making sure that the way that data gets visualized is displayed in a consistent manner moving forward. And that is something that we are highly focused on in terms of our data hub requirement build moving forward. And I think before I continue, I just wanted to say that it's really important to call out that this does not mean that we are planning to build these functions from scratch. In fact, we're actually looking to industry and saying, you know what, there are ecosystem players out there that are doing this. And it doesn't make sense for us to rebuild what is already working. All we need to do is create alignment, identify the gaps, and create that consolidated alignment and consensus in approach. So that's really what our main focus is moving forward with the Data Hub project in the months and phases to come. Jules, I'd like to ask you, can you please elaborate on how we're thinking about our Data Hub from an ecosystem perspective, just maybe to explain that a little bit better?
Sure. So if you think more broadly than accommodation, whether it's flight data or rail data or perhaps MICE data or tours in the future, we're wanting to create a central data hub or ecosystem, which is a series of data warehouses or databases or data ingestion or distribution systems that can work together and talk together. But in the centralized hub, the data comes in for processing, cleansing, and verification so that we can come into a consistent format for all of our distribution partners to push out there. But this ecosystem consists of many, many, many players, and many of you on the call will represent some of those, like GDSs, OTAs, hotels, travel platforms, other data hubs or data sets, proxy data sets. And it's pivotal that we work with other stakeholders and other aligned initiatives so that we can use the power of our coalition to streamline and then scale those solutions, because it's the scale that's the secret sauce. I'll give you an example. With the World Sustainable Hospitality Alliance, we hold regular bilateral meetings with them. They are working on a hotel data platform for their members. And so we're wanting to see how can we get their data inputs from their hotels into this ecosystem for the benefit, the greater benefit of all. We're also committed to using the universal criteria that were announced at COP in Baku last year by the WSHA and endorsed by UNWTO. So this is a team sport. And so for Jess and the team and I at Travalyst, it's about really trying to make the most of everybody's kind of solutions and talents and suggestions, and then harmonize, align, get behind, and then build and scale from there. Thanks, Jess.
Amazing. Thanks, Jules. So this next slide is something I'm very proud of. It is my baby, and I think I'm just going to spend a little bit of time diving into it a little bit because I find it so important to the context and how we plan on addressing this complex project. So we know that in order to successfully execute on a project of this complexity, we need to account for all those dependencies and moving parts, many of which we actually do not have control over. So therefore, we've been very intentional about our how. So first and foremost, we know that what we need for Data Hub is a technical solution, right? And what that means is we need a solution that can be configured to fit multiple use cases so that we're not being too short-sighted with our solution. We need to have it set up for quick releases and iterations whilst being completely scalable. We also know that we need very strong data governance. And for this, we are very fortunate to have an incredible in-house business analyst and ecosystem architect, Priyanth, who works alongside our coalition and technical partners. So really, we are in very great hands when it comes to that technical feasibility lens. Secondly, we cannot ignore that keyword compliance. As I'm sure most of you know, there's been a lot of movement in the compliance and policy space over the last few years, really just trying to regulate and keep our industry honest. But some legislation sits within its early discovery phase, some is in review, whilst others are actively in practice. And while these blocks continue to develop in the short and long term, we need to ensure that we align towards these, we are informed by them, and ultimately comply with all those requirements moving forward. And again, lucky for us at Travalyst, we have a team of excellent data strategists and head of policy who sits within those external working groups with the policy makers as part of the forefront of these requirements as they're being refined, and feed that information to us so that we can enable that alignment, informed, and compliance in our roadmap. And that's very exciting for us. So I'd love to introduce Arrow and Kirsjan. They are our gurus and help us navigate and track that ever-shifting landscape of compliance and policy. And then last but not least, it's all good and well that you have a functional product that is compliant. But at the end of the day, if there's no market need for it, it might as well just be a glorified calculator that sits in the cupboard. We need to ensure that throughout the product lifecycle, we include the voice of all relevant industry players. And here's where we turn to our amazing working group, which I'll explain in a bit more detail later. But these working groups ensure that there is validated market need. They assist in building consensus on the direction and the solution, and ultimately support and drive the distribution and adoption at scale. And we truly believe that this approach, this trifecta approach, has been set up to mitigate these risks, these gaps, and possible misalignments, and coordinate us for a synergized work effort moving forward. Great. So before I move on and go into a little bit more detail, I just wanted to take a step back and explain how the Travalyst product space is split up. So currently we have two verticals within our product space, obviously looking to extend in the future. But for now, we have the transport vertical. As Jules mentioned, that's where Tim and Rail and all those amazing transport working groups sit. And then you have accommodation, which is a vertical in its own. Each of these verticals have a dedicated product manager. For transport, it's Alex. For myself, I run the accommodation working group. And within a working group, we have dedicated project or task teams that take on initiatives and projects that have been identified from that working group. Actually, I think you can go to the next slide. I think it explains it a little bit better. So vertical task teams are created around a specific project need, right? Members are specifically selected based on their input, their expertise, their experience, and are seen as subject matter experts. They really are selected based on their contribution to the project. They're not necessarily limited only to Travalyst members and partners, but really we look to the industry as a whole to gather as much insight and knowledge as we can, and ultimately improve the likelihood for success in our projects. But these groups, like I mentioned, are set up and adjusted as and when needed as the project or the task runs through its phases. The meeting cadence for these working groups is every 2 weeks. We're wanting to make very quick progress, so we have quite a high turnover of progress on these meetings. The agenda, very fluid and very agile based on our approach to be iterative. And basically, our purpose really is just to talk about relevant topics, drive consensus, and address and come up with the project requirements that we as a whole, as the industry voices, agree is needed for the greater good of the project. Next, we have a vertical working group. Now that is obviously the entire vertical itself, and those are slightly different. Those are constant. They have and always will exist. They are our Travalyst members and partners. This group is responsible to provide consistency and the perspective on the projects that fall within that vertical. So for example, within accommodation, we have the data hub, but we also have the certifications initiative and some policy updates. So really that job of that group is to be that balcony view, sometimes refer to it as. So really just to give us that perspective and to keep us honest for the greater good of that vertical, whilst the rest of us kind of deep dive into the reads. The meeting cadence for this working group is every 6 weeks. As you can imagine, there's probably less to have to update on, but very important to have those constant checkpoints. And the agenda is very much based on the projects themselves, what's happening on them, open Q&A to ensure that teams are kept honest, identify key risks, ask key critical questions, identify dependencies, and strategize collectively as a unit. And lastly, we have the Data Hub Industry Exchange. Welcome. This is where we are now. We acknowledge the need to be transparent, not just in our execution of this project, but throughout the product development lifecycle. And this project is set to be an industry game changer and a force for good. And it aims in some way to impact each organization within the tourism and travel industry at some point. So we set up these industry exchange webinars to ensure that we keep the industry at large updated on the project progress, so that we can proactively build familiarity and ultimately support in driving adoption of our solutions as and when they come into operation. And these will occur quarterly with these high-level updates, which we openly want to share with the industry at a regular cadence. The purpose really is just keeping everybody up to date and making sure that we, again, optimize our chances for success for these projects. Great. Cool. More about our hows. So now I'm going to go into our approach. How do we see this project panning out? I think we all know it's a bit of a monster of a project, so we need to break it down into phases. So really we're taking an agile, phased, iterative approach where we can make it bite-sized, achievable pieces. Just to give a bit of context from where we've been and where we are now, in 2024, Travalyst and the accommodation working group had initiated very active discussions around finding a solution to deal with this lack of single source of truth, which COVID especially had highlighted and catalyzed as a topic for discussion. So really the group started focusing on this concept of there's a problem, we need a solution, which we now affectionately call the Accommodation Data Hub. In 2025, we took all that internal discovery and pre-work that we had done with our accommodation working group and created a Data Hub specific working group to start driving further progress and momentum on the project. Travalyst had used this time to bring in very specific industry experts and then validate and justify and interrogate a lot of the working assumptions that had already been made. And we continue to do so as we iterate and refine more towards our end solution goal. So I think this year, the only thing I'd like to call out is, I suppose, this transition from being sort of holistic to being action driven. And now we're starting to really let the rubber hit the road. We've kind of broken the project down into 2 phases. 1A, which we call our distribution pilot. This is the proof of concept for the Data Hub. It's based mostly on estimate or proxy data sets distributed at scale. The main intention here for us is to learn. Anyone who's from the product space will know the sooner you can get something to market, the sooner you can start learning and the sooner you can start iterating. And this is something that we are very excited to be demonstrating at our global convening in France in the beginning of April. Spoiler alert, we're discussing the possibility of a webinar, so please keep an eye open for that. Cool, and then phase 1B, this is our MVP. This is the Accommodation Data Hub MVP that Jules was speaking about. And this focus has really been on estimate and actual accommodation sustainability data from multiple sources, following very specific compliance requirements and aligned to others while they're not in practice. So whilst some of the other LCA requirements are still in review, we want to make sure that we continuously remain informed and aligned so that as and when they come into practice, we are compliant. And then, of course, just distributing at scale through multiple channels. Our approach is to be scrappy, but not sloppy. We want to be iterative, we want to fail fast, and we want to fail forward. We never get it right the first time, let's be real. Anyone who's been in product knows that You need to set up a space where you can fail and you're going to know that you can improve and iterate fast. So broadly speaking, before I move off of our approach and where we are, just wanted to say that in terms of the detail, we are in the alignment and scoping phase of the project with the group, and we're busy transitioning into the deep dive solution phases. So we've been looking at what are the problem statements within our industry, what are the problem statements that we can and should focus on for our data hub project in the long term and in our MVP. And shortly we'll be moving into the solution mode, which is deep diving into the data hub functional blocks that I mentioned earlier and aligning that with the use cases and touch points that we identify in our alignment sessions. Great. What we do know. So I know this list looks very short, and it's not to say that it is short, because there's a lot that we do know. But there's also a lot that we don't know, but we thought it'd be faster to just give you this list. So it goes without saying that this project is complex and relies on industry-wide collaboration. We believe we've set ourselves up for success and we're prepared to pivot as needed. But as a working group, we're working on some key assumptions, and this is how far this is where we're at the moment with our working group assumptions. Number one, we have converged on the corporate traveler as our headpin consumer for MVP. Why is that? Well, again, anyone from business or product will tell you that your very first use case needs to be identified using the 80-20 split. You need to try and find where you can make that 80% impact or the biggest impact with the least amount of effort. And we believe the corporate and travel industry is probably the best place where we can govern this impact and opportunity. Why? Well, in itself, it is massive and it is growing. Corporate travel compliance, those requirements are also very well understood, especially when it comes to B2B disclosure. So that is a nice segue for us. And then corporate travel at a certain scale has a need to make data-informed decision and to report retrospectively for corporate reporting purposes and to meet climate action plans. Again, if you're from product, you would know that you would rather go for a painkiller than for a vitamin, right? Easy to deal with a pain point and deal with that rather than try and sell a vitamin. So we identified the biggest need would be within the corporate travel space, especially within that scale. We're also starting on hotel level for data ingestion, but we do plan to move to other forms of accommodation in the near future. Again, we're considering things like short-term rentals and so forth in the further future, but for now, hotels just offer the biggest opportunity to validate that impact. And again, we're working very closely with the WSHA in this regard, as well as independent hoteliers as we go through this process. And finally, the data that we're going to start off with is environmental data. Why? Well, there's a market need and a demand for carbon and environmental information. Number one, because it's aligned to a lot of the 2030 goals that we've all set. But also, like Jules mentioned earlier, we've got the GHG footprint data, which is a universal criteria as set by the WSHA and endorsed by the UNWTO. So very much made a lot of sense to stay within that space and where the most impact is and where the most certainty is. We'll also make sure that it is informed by compliance, LCA and PEFCOR, and take into account the next iteration of the HCMI. Again, a lot of those moving parts that we don't have full control over, but are acknowledging in our process moving forward. And future iterations for data will include social and biodiversity data. So the buck does definitely not stop at environmental, it's just our starting point. I think just to finish off this slide, the Data Hub Working Group meets again later this week to keep refining our scope of work for our MVP, and then our partners will then validate a lot of our assumptions at the annual partners convening in April in France, as I mentioned earlier. So very exciting things happening for us in the space at the moment, and we'll continue to be as transparent as per usual. Lastly, I just wanted to, again, take another step back and just say, we've gone into a lot of the detail, a little bit into the reads of this project and the solutions. And I just wanted to take a step back and just paint the picture of our long-term view. we see that access to this consolidated, consistent, compliant data, honestly, as step one. It is the start, it is not the end. It's merely the enabler to the ecosystem and the stakeholders within our industry to drive that specific need within your own businesses and to take that data and serve it within your business purposes, needs, missions, and goals, whatever that looks like. And that's something that I really just wanted to highlight as an outcome of this discussion. And then lastly, the long-term view. As Jules has mentioned and alluded to, it doesn't stop with accommodations. We're very excited to be in the accommodation space. We've got a lot of high hopes and ambitions, but our long-term goal is really to bring in all those aspects of tourism and travel so that we have a single source of truth to all work from and to leverage moving forward. And really it's about bringing these aspects together as a venture to unlock even larger opportunities because we want to drive systems change for travel to be a force for good. Great. Just a couple of closing off remarks from my side. We will distribute the recording of this webinar for those who could not attend or if you wish to rewatch or share it. We'd love for you to stay in touch with us at Travalyst. You can do that by following us on LinkedIn and by signing up to our newsletter on travalyst.org in the Get in Touch section. We'll keep you updated with news from all of our work across tourism and travel. We got some exciting things happening, especially this year. And we can also let you know about some upcoming events and webinars in our calendar. And just a final note, we really do want to emphasize that the ultimate success of this project lies in the industry's ability to collaborate and adopt. The what's and the how's around the data matters, but it's ultimately the distribution at scale so that travelers have access to credible, consistent, compliant data when making travel choices is what we're going for. And we can only do this if we work together as an industry to maximize impact. So we'd love for you to stay in touch, join us on this journey. And yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for your time. We really do appreciate it.